A Georgia man has been freed from death row after the Supreme Court ruled his case was tainted by racial bias. Timothy Tyrone Foster was convicted of murder by an all-white jury in 1987 and sentenced to death. Notes from the original trial show prosecutors eliminated African Americans during jury selection. In a 7-1 decision, the court ruled today those jurors were eliminated because they were black, a violation of Foster's civil rights. With Chief Justice John Roberts writing that prosecutors were, quote, motivated in substantial part by race in their conduct. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins us now from our Washington bureau. Jan, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Of course.
So what's the basis for today's ruling?
Well, I mean, the court really underscored a long-held principle that, blacks could not be excluded from jury selection under the Constitution. So, I mean, it was a pretty emphatic decision written by the Chief Justice and said that Georgia prosecutors back 30 years ago had done that when they excluded two that they focus on specifically, two jurors from the jury. As Justice John Roberts said, this was basically the arguments on Georgia's side were pretextual and reeked of afterthought. Now, Georgia tried to defend itself by saying they weren't singling out these jurors on the basis of race and that they, in fact, were trying to, show they were following the court's guidelines. Again, this was 30 years ago, and the court 30 years ago had just adopted a new series of guidelines for showing race and discrimination in jury selection. So the Georgia prosecutors were saying they were trying to kind of follow those guidelines, and that's why they were singling out prospective jurors, just so that they were really being careful not to follow race. Well, I mean, obviously the court did not buy that. As I said, the Chief Justice said that just reeked of afterthought. And so this really paves the way for a new trial for Timothy Foster.
Well, I want to talk to you about that new trial for Timothy Foster and kind of what that means. But first, there was some pretty concrete evidence here for the Supreme Court to take a look at, too.
Well, at the oral argument, I thought it was very clear at the time that Foster was going to prevail in this case. Justice Kagan, for example, Elena Kagan, a liberal justice, said this is as clear of a violation as this court will ever see. And even conservative Justice Samuel Alito, I mean, a former prosecutor. So you may think he may be a little less friendly to the defense lawyers. I mean, even he was troubled. And of course, he was with the majority today and wrote a separate opinion on his own, kind of outlining what he thought should happen when the lower courts now get back involved in this case. But again, in his separate opinion today, he was even, I think, more clear than the Chief Justice was in some ways, and emphasizing the importance of these principles that the court has adopted, decades and decades ago, that prohibit racial discrimination in jury selection. Now, I think, again, to keep in context, though, for people who are saying, like, why does this keep happening? This happened 30 years ago. This jury was seated 30 years ago. Why you're seeing some people saying that they're relieved today is that death penalty groups say that jury selection that race discrimination in jury selection still persists, though it's just less obvious. And they thought it was important that the court come out with this emphatic statement, kind of reminding people of these principles. And that's what the court did today.
As you mentioned a little earlier, Timothy Foster will get a new trial. And I have to ask you, what is the significance of any of today's ruling on other death penalty cases around the country? I have to imagine it could open a number of them up.
Well, that's what the dissenting Justice Clarence Thomas said, that this is going to encourage people to, kind of go back and try to prove things after, that happened at the time 30 years ago and try to now put today's justifications on them to argue for a new trial. But I mean, I think that's going to be pretty difficult because here, these notes that you talked about earlier, where the prosecutors were singling out all the black jurors and putting a B by their names. I mean, those are going to be pretty unusual to find. And even the defense attorneys in this case said that this was not a smoking gun. This was an arsenal of smoking guns that you rarely come across. So I think it may be harder in some other cases. So this, to me, is going to be a pretty limited case. It focuses on Timothy Foster, the extraordinary smoking guns that were unearthed, the notes that were so explicit that the prosecutors wrote back in 1987. But it's important because it is a statement and a reminder in today's world that racial discrimination in jury selection is flatly prohibited. And that was a decision, of course, written by the Chief Justice of the United States.
Great insight. Jan Crawford, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jamie.